Welcome back to the Cap Report. I hope y'all are doing well, and it's finally here. Fight week for one of the most anticipated cards of the year. UFC 308, Illia Topuria defends the featherweight title against Max Holloway. In the co-main event, we have a 5-rounder as Robert Whittaker takes on Chimaev. And in the future fight, we have Ankalaev fighting Alexander Rakic, a fight that, if he wins, should see Ankalaev face Alex Pereira in the future. Don't forget, this card is in Abu Dhabi, so it's going to be at a different time than normal. I believe the main card is starting, if you're in the US, the prelims are starting at 10 a.m. Eastern, and the main card will be starting at 2 p.m. Eastern. But as always, this is just going to be pretty general, just thoughts, opinions, but a little bit of a breakdown and my predictions for UFC 308. And we'll do a real quick, brief run over the prelims, and then we'll get into the main card. All right, so real briefly, for the prelims, I have Aslan by knockout, Fakhretdinov by decision, Nardeev by decision, Basharat by decision. Hey, we're going to rock with Chris Barnett. First time back in, 2 years? By knockout. Bruno Ferreira by knockout. Orlby by decision. And then Jeff Neal versus Javier Dos Anjos. I believe Jeff Neal should be able to get the victory here. I think as long as he can kind of defend the takedown attempts, Dos Anjos is too old at this point, and I think that Neal should be able to, not piece him up, but should be able to have enough success standing up that he finds a decision win. Maybe a knockout, but probably a decision win. Now we go ahead and get into the main card, and opening up the main card in the middleweight division, we have Shara Bullet taking on Armen Petrosyan. Shara is 14-0. He's on a 3-fight win streak within the UFC, including wins over Bruno Silva and Mikhail Oleksiejczuk. Petrosyan's 8-3. He comes into this fight off of a submission loss to Rodolfo Vieira. Petrosyan's a good challenge for Shara. You know, he's beat quality opposition in the UFC, and I think that if he can utilize his grappling in this fight, he could find a comfortable win. That being said, I feel like he's going to look to strike with Shara, and that's going to play into Shara's skill set. I think it could be close, but I am going to go with Shara edging out a decision win. I do think that eventually Shara gets found out for being a bit overrated and being a bit of an aura merchant, right? But I just don't think it quite happens yet. I just don't trust Petrosyan to use the proper skill set to find a win here. And next up we have Lerone Murphy versus Dan Ige in the featherweight division. Murphy is 14-0-1. You know, he's coming into this fight having won 7 straight fights in the UFC, most recently decision wins over Josh Kulibau and Edson Barboza. Ige comes in this fight at 18-8. His last fight, a day of short notice fight against Diego Lopez. Prior to that, he knocked out Andre Fili. You know, it's an interesting matchup. I do think that this fight's going to be harder than it looks like on paper for Murphy. But that being said, I think he's going to be able to get some takedowns. I don't think he'll be able to hold Ige down there. And I think Ige is going to have some moments standing up, but Murphy's going to control the fight mainly in a point fighting style. I see Murphy finding like a 29-28 decision win. I think Ige can still round. I just don't think he can win the whole fight. Next up, we move to the feature fight in the light heavyweight division where Ankalaev takes on Alexander Rakic. Ankalaev comes into this with a 19-1-1 record. He's on a 10-fight unbeaten run, though there were some kind of peculiar moments within that time frame. You know, there's a no contest fight with Johnny Walker and the majority draw Blachowicz. But he comes into this fight technically on a 1-fight win streak, you know, a knockout win over Johnny Walker in their rematch. Rakic is 14-4. He's on a 2-fight loss streak, a knockout loss to Yuri Prohaska earlier the year, and a TKO loss by injury to Jan Blachowicz back in 2022. You know, I hope this is a great fight, and I think it can be, but I think there's a pretty even chance of us getting like 2 different outcomes, right? I think we can get a very hand-fighting, hand-parrying, heavy leg kick style fight, which is a little more boring, or we get a very fun, you know, back-and-forth striking matchup, kickboxing fight. That is what I hope we get. You know, a lot's on the line here. As long as Ankalaev wins this fight, he should get a title fight. For Rakic, I don't know. I mean, there's not really much in the division, so maybe you give him one if they wins. But point being is, there, at least for Ankalaev, there's a title fight on the line here, right? And I came into this process thinking pretty heavily that it was Ankalaev's fight to lose, but the more I've watched back their previous fights, the more unsure I am. You know, Rakic is such a weird guy to place because he got injured in his second to last fight. He looked great, right? He looked great against Yuri, but it's hard to judge because Yuri, you know, just throws defense out the door, so he looks so good offensively because he just lets you. He's not checking leg kicks. He's not, you know, he doesn't have his hands up. His chin is out there to be hit. You know, I do think Rakic is a bit of a trickier opponent for Ankalaev than he's given credit for. I think he's the most likely to be able to repeat the performance like Blachowicz did against Ankalaev, especially with like the leg kick success. That being said, I do think we've seen improvements from Ankalaev in checking leg kicks since then. I just think that Rakic might lack the power to put out like the higher end guys in this division. And looking at past to victory here, I think there's multiple ways for Ankalaev to find a win in this fight. You know, I don't think he's going to wrestle unless it's completely necessary. You know, if he's getting like eaten up by the leg kicks, or if Rakic like stuns him or somehow is dominating on the feet, you know, I could see it then. I could see Ankalaev winning a decision, controlling the striking, or a wrestling based game plan where he can controls the positions, and he lands a lot of damage. He is pretty active with strikes on the ground when he gets the fight to the ground. I could even see like a slight submission chance, even though it's pretty unlikely. And I think a knockout's a pretty solid chance too. I think decision is the highest possibility one, but I think knockout's pretty likely too. And for Rakic, I think that his path to victory is going to be through leg kicks early and often, taking apart Ankalaev's power from under him. Blachowicz had that man so wobbly, so I don't see why you wouldn't follow that path to success, right? And I think from there, you balance your striking, and I think that after you get the leg kicks really starting to hit, you mix the levels with the kicks, maybe start going high after that. I think you could find a finish win here for Rakic, but I think a decision win's a little more likely. In my pick for this one, I'm taking Ankalaev by decision. I do think that Rakic can cause him problems, but I just think that he somewhat addressed the checking leg kick problem. I question Rakic's ability to be able to generate enough power to finish Ankalaev, and I just think that Rakic isn't defensively sound enough either. I think there's going to be a lot of cautious hand fighting early on, some light exchanges. I think over time, Ankalaev's going to start landing good shots. I think he's got a great flash head kick, which he can mix in with combinations and just in exchanges in general. I think Ankalaev is often misunderstood as a wrestler when he's a striker who can happen to wrestle, right? But he's a striker first. And I think he's going to show out with a strong performance, likely winning all 3 rounds and route to a dominant decision. As I said, I do think there is a chance for him to get the finish. Rakic did take a lot of damage in his last fight, but I just think the decision is a more likely outcome. Next up, we have the co-main event, Robert Whittaker versus Khamzat Chimaev. Whittaker comes into this fight 26-7 on a 2-fight win streak, a decision win over Paulo Costa, and a TKO over Ikram Aliskerov on roughly a week's notice earlier this year. Khamzat is 13-0. He's on a 7-fight win streak within the UFC. His most recent win, a majority decision over short notice opponent Kamaru Usman at middleweight. That fight just being days over a year ago at this point. And, I think it's going to be fascinating to see what Khamzat looks like in this fight. He's had health complications earlier this year, which pushed back this fight. He's been a completely different person this fight week. He seems to have a better perspective on things. He talked a lot about having a more professional approach in changing after changing fight teams. So I think it's going to be interesting to see if that improves his cardio, if it improves his approach to fighting. Like looking back like at the Burns fight where he was ignoring his coaches, right? Or how he said he wasn't taking care of his body in the right ways or overtraining. I just think it's crazy too because Khamzat, he struggled to make weight at welterweight, and yet it seems like he struggled to make weight at middleweight here too. So I am a little concerned in that regard. There's a pretty general dynamic of this fight being discussed. The idea of Khamzat's early round danger, and if Whittaker can survive that, he'll be more likely to find a finish later in the rounds, right? I think that makes it really important that this is a 5-round co-main event, because Khamzat's gone the distance for 3-rounders. He's never had to go the distance for a 5-rounder, and he's kept a pretty crazy pace in those 3-rounders. I do think there's a shot that he surprises here with his cardio. I think he will fall off in the later rounds a little bit, but I think there is a chance that he actually has 5-round cardio, and we just haven't got to see it. Khamzat's pretty straightforward in his takedown attempts. He doesn't, shy away from just charging in. Look at like the Holland fight, right? He's got a great blast double. He can catch kicks as well and get trips from like those positions. He does a great job of kind of just smothering guys to get them to the ground. He can even use output like teep kicks to get guys against the cage, giving him opportunities to take people down against the cage. But yeah, Khamzat he tries to get the fight to the ground and find a finish in that first round, which makes sense for a guy who's wrestling based. It's the best time for him to find a submission win when the guy he's fighting is the driest. I think that all plays well for Khamzat into the first round. Looking at pathways to victory, I think an early finish is the ideal route for Khamzat here. Using your physicality, your strength, your presence, the great wrestling technique to get the fight to the ground, finish with strikes or a submission. I do think the later it goes, the less likely you'll see Khamzat finish it. Though Whittaker hasn't been known to have the strongest chin, so I think there is a chance that Khamzat still catches him. But I do think that if Khamzat doesn't finish Whittaker early, probably be looking at a decision if he gets a win here. And for Whittaker, I do think that he'll survive the first a bit. I think there's a solid shot that he does get taken down. Ideally for him, it's just going to be that you get taken down later in the round. Even if it's past the halfway mark, it makes it huge and a lot easier for you to survive that round. I think he's got to be careful of his blitzes early on. Khamzat could, time a double leg off of them or catch him on an entrance. Likewise, I think that head kick combo you got to be a little careful about in case Khamzat catches it early to take him down. But I do think beyond that, beyond that round, there is a great shot for Whittaker, to find a finish win here. I think it's a pretty even shot of Whittaker finding a finish or winning by decision. I think if he finds a finish, it probably will be closer like to the third and on. It's funny because, I'm thinking back on my predictions for Khamzat and, I've got to look like a hater because almost all the time I pick against Khamzat, I actually was thinking that I do only pick against him, but I realized I did pick him to beat Usman just because I didn't trust Usman's submission defense, which he actually did better than I expected in that fight. But with my pick, I'm going to go with Whittaker by 4th round knockout. I see a lot of decision talk here, but I feel like his style of striking is actually great for catching Khamzat. I think once out of the first, Khamzat can struggle a little bit to find his range, just being stuck on the edge of it too much, and I think the blitzing in and out can make that even more difficult for him. As I said, Khamzat Khamzat struggles to get his head off the center line, and I think that's going to make blitzing even more effective, as the times that Khamzat's been hurt the worst in his fights have been straight shots. Usman and Burns had the most success with straight shots and hurt Khamzat with straight shots. I think Whittaker will blitz in, catch him with a straight, drop Khamzat, and finish him off with ground and pound. And finally, we get to the main event, Illia Topuria versus Max Holloway for the featherweight title. Topuria comes into this fight undefeated at 15-0, having 7 of those wins in the UFC. He's on a run of submitting Bryce Mitchell, putting a masterclass decision over Josh Emmett, and a knockout win over Alexander Volkanovski. Holloway's 26-7. He comes into this fight on a 3-fight win streak with a stunning buzzer beater knockout of Justin Gaethje, a knockout win over Chan Sung Jung, the Korean Zombie, and a decision win over Arnold Allen. I have a slight fear of Topuria having his Cody Garbrandt moment in this fight. After destroying a legend of the division and the sport, just dropping off right after with a quality opponent. It's crazy, actually. I feel bad a bit for Topuria because I think Holloway's his toughest matchup in this division, and it's his first title defense. I think people, they see the Holloway-Gaethje knockout, and they kind of forget a lot of the context behind that fight, and I think it allows it to kind of cloud their vision on this fight. Holloway broke Gaethje's nose with a kick, which, that is damage that he, an injury he caused, damage he caused, but I think it influenced the way the rest of the fight played out, right? How much Holloway controlled that fight. But also, there was a rough eye poke, which I think made a notable difference in the fight too. I think we're going to see Topuria be notably faster, particularly notably faster than Gaethje, Max's last opponent too. I don't think they're even comparable, you're right? Like, Topuria is such a more cleaner, technical striker than Gaethje, in my opinion, and I think you're going to see it's a notable difference in the way that these striking exchanges happen. And I think it's interesting because I do think that Max provides a very different stylistic challenge than Topuria's last 3 opponents. I think Holloway can be effective here. The head kick, as is often mentioned as the biggest issue for Topuria, the head kick defense. I think he did better in the Volkanovski fight, and I think that the spinning back kicks can actually be a point of interest for Holloway to throw too. And I'm interested to see how the volume plays, Max's volume plays into Topuria's counter striking and kind of his flow within his striking, and how he kind of uses that Philly shell sometimes. And so getting into Holloway's past victories, I think for Holloway, he's got to be very careful on how he approaches the striking. He can't overextend, he can't get out of position. I think he does do a good job of moving, particularly laterally, which could be good in terms of getting away from Topuria's pressure. I think he can look for a head kick, as I said, but I think as Topuria's gotten better defensively defending those, and I think the spinning back kick is actually the more kind of dangerous strike for him to use here. That's what he broke Justin Gaethje's nose with, and Topuria does like to dip his head in exchanges at times. Yeah, I don't see Holloway finding a knockout unless it's kind of probably off of one of those kicks or he catches Topuria overextended somehow. Max grows into fight, so I think a decision win is the likely path for him here, taking over through a combination of his volume and footwork, mixing in the leg kicks late, finding a decision win that way, I think is his path. For Topuria, I do think there is a genuine chance that Topuria knocks out Holloway. Despite Holloway's granite chin, Holloway has absorbed the most strikes in UFC history, and I do think the conditions have to be right for Topuria to find a finish. I think that Illia is great at controlling the octagon, cornering his opponents against the cage, and I think that's what he's going to have to do, get the fight to that point and create big exchanges with Holloway to find a finish. I think that he's got to get Holloway going back and forth with him against the cage for him to be able to knock Holloway out. But I think it's just one of the pathways for Topuria, right? I think he could wrestle his way to a win if he wanted to here. He could combine the wrestling and the striking. He's got 5-round cardio, so a decision is possible as well. Max has pretty good submission defense, so I think his submission is unlikely. I think Topuria is genuinely the better guy in more facets of this fight. And for my pick, I'm going with Illia Topuria by decision. I think it's really tempting to take the knockout, but I'm not bold enough to do that. I do think he's going to be able to drop Holloway at some point in the fight once. I think that his pressure and octagon control, cutting off the movement of Holloway, will work at some point, and he'll force Holloway to go back and forth with him, and I think he will finish him. I don't think you will see Topuria points to the ground. I do not think that you'll see Holloway participate in that. I think Holloway has good enough footwork, though, to keep him out of danger for most of the fight. I do think Topuria's got cleaner boxing. I think he's faster. I think he's going to be effective with leg kicks, and, Max tends to struggle with boxers and shorter guys, and this matchup gives him both of those. I have Illia Topuria by decision. And that's going to reach the end of the video. Thank y'all for watching. As always, please don't forget to leave a like, subscribe if you have not before. Please leave a comment, let me know what your picks are for the fights. Do you have any thoughts on my picks? Anything like that, it's always appreciated. It makes my day seeing that kind of stuff. Yeah, but I'm really hyped for this one. I hope y'all are too. I'm gonna keep this outro brief. I appreciate all 399 of y'all, and let's enjoy these fights.